Welcome to Getting to Know, the show in which we go over the action figure history of various Transformer characters. And it is about time that we talk about the single most requested character to date, Jazz. It really shouldn't come as any surprise. Jazz is a massive fan favorite. And I want to thank Andrea Enriquez 7257, Mark 048B, Destination Jazz or Jazz 43, and Pyro from Team Fortress 2 Official. These guys all went out of their way to request Jazz, a couple of them more than once, so now we're finally going to be taking a look at the coolest cat to ever come out of the 84 cast. If you do not know who Jazz is, Jazz was the second in command of the Autobots and the leader of the Special Operations Unit. Whereas most Autobots were security guards or scientists, Jazz, Sunstreaker, and Sideswipe were soldiers. That meant that they were the three that handled battle better than anyone save for Optimus Prime. Jazz was always cool under pressure, a skilled fighter, and a gifted tactician, though he often enjoyed improvising his battle strategies. For that reason, for a lot of kids of the 80s, Jazz was the epitome of cool. It helped that he was voiced by the incomparable Scatman Crothers, the Jazz legend.
Autobots, start your engines! Ready, Prime, let's roll!
Between his awesome look, cool voice, and general personality, it's hard not to love the guy. What helps is the fact that Jazz had some amazing toys. In the 1984 cast, there were a lot of Autobot cars. Sideswipe, Sunstreaker, Bluestreak, Prowl. Jazz was the most unique out of any of them. Whereas the Lamborghini Bros had to share a vehicle mode, and Prowl and Bluestreak were repaints of each other, Jazz was unique in every way. He never had to share a car mode or a transformation scheme with anyone else. His robot mode is amongst the most solid out of any of the G1 Transformers. His transformation was definitely more in-depth than some of the others, but also gave you a more rewarding play experience. His weapons worked a treat to really fill him out. It's undeniable that Jazz was one of the standout stars of the 84 toy cast. Jazz was so popular that he actually received his second piece of merchandise within his debut year, that being a stamp bot. This was just a tiny figurine of Jazz that you could use to, well, make stamps. 1985 would see even more Jazz. You see, if you went and got a Kabaya Transformers Milk Caramel Candy toy, you would actually potentially get a tiny figurine of Jazz alongside your chocolate. That said, here in the United States, we had a Cookie Crisp cereal contest. If you were able to win the giveaway, you would get your own unique Jazz. In 1986 in Japan, you would have had the Cybertron Hero Collection 22, giving you what would later go on to be known as the Decoy Jazz. 1989 would see Jazz getting his first new mold, that being the Pretender Jazz. Now, Pretenders were a unique gimmick for Transformers. The idea was you would get a smaller version of popular Transformer characters that would then be able to be put inside of giant armor suits. If you were a Decepticon, you would turn into a horrible monster, whereas the Autobots were supposed to look like armored up futuristic humans, and essentially give you two action figures in one. The Jazz is a bit rough. He is a almost overly simplified version of the G1 figure. The robot mode has a number of issues with transformations that can lead to breakage, and the armor mode, even though it's unique, it's not unique in terms of a toy shelf. We've never had a Transformer like this, but there would have been plenty of dollar store space heroes that would have had a pretty similar look and color scheme to this guy. That said, if you did just want the tiny Jazz, you could actually pop into a Kmart store and get a Legends Jazz. In keeping with that, you could actually go over to Japan in 1989 and get the Hero set. This would give you the Pretender Bumblebee, Jazz, Grimlock, and Starscream, all without their armors, but they would have a little bit extra paint put on them. Just 1 year later, in 1990, you would get the Action Master Jazz. The Action Masters were an actually pretty logical evolution from the Pretenders. Take the Transformer characters proper and make them the action figures without having to worry about transformations. The Action Masters were infamous at the time, and are ultimately deemed as being the line that killed the G1 toy line, though they have a lot of love given their way nowadays. Personally, I love how Action Master Jazz looks. His colors are on point, and this would have been the most cartoon-accurate Jazz at that time. But still, it's hard to keep a good toy down, which is why if you were in Europe or Australia, you could have gone to a store and gotten the Classics Jazz. 1992 was the release of the Generation 2 line. And of course, they brought over the mold of G1 Jazz. But unlike Optimus Prime, who was just given a new trailer, Jazz was given a completely new paint job and energy. This is the version of G1 Jazz's mold I own. I adore G2 Jazz. I love this light blue and orange and green throughout the figure, the big one on the hood. The thing about Jazz, right? He's supposed to be an artist, energetic, a little bit zany even. As much as I like the color scheme of original Jazz, I think G2 Jazz's color scheme fits the character so much more. It makes him seem so much more alive, fun. This seems like the type of guy who would party all the time, and yet there's a certain subtlety to everything. I love how the number 1 actually is forming what would be the end of a music note across the hood once you transform the figure. The figure has limited articulation, especially by 1992 standards, but it still gives you that great original G1 transformation. Alongside that, this figure would have come with a water pistol. It would have been novel at the time, but overall, it's nowhere near as cool as the original gun, just that good old chromed pistol of Jazz. This is still one of the best figures of Jazz in my humble opinion, and whenever I think of Jazz's color scheme, I actually think of G2 Jazz. Jazz was supposed to receive 2 more figures in 1995. One would have been a yellow and orange redeco of the G1 mold. The other would have been a brand new motorcycle mode to put him into the laser cycles. Neither one of these figures ever came out. However, they would get successors way down the line. Jazz skipped over the Beast era, making his next appearance in the year 2002 in the Super Collection line. This is just a Japanese line of PVC figures meant to invoke the original G1 cartoon designs. This Jazz would come in his anime colors, or a pewter version that would make him look like a piece of metal. He was actually released in 2003 under the Heroes of Cybertron line, with more or less the same deco, save for a darker gray for the face. There was also the first re-release of Jazz in the new era. There was the Transformers Collection Book Box Jazz. The same was true for the eHobby exclusive Golden Lagoon Jazz. This Jazz was done up entirely in metallic gold paint in order to invoke the Golden Lagoon episode of the G1 cartoon. Here in the United States, there would be a commemorative series release of Jazz. Back over in Japan, you could have gotten the Generation Figure Collection Meister, which would have just been a little bottle cap Jazz figure. You could have also gotten the My Clone Jazz, and I mean, he's not as nice looking as Thundercracker, but at least he's still not as sad looking as Sideswipe. Going into 2004, you'd be able to get the Hard Hero Jazz. This was a cold cast porcelain bust that was limited to 2,500 pieces worldwide. Jazz would have had a Spy Changer in the Universe 2003 toy line. You could have also gotten the world's smallest transforming Transformer Jazz. This was the original G1 Jazz shrunk down to almost 2 inches tall. This was a great little toy line of blind boxes, and I kinda hate that I was never able to find any of them. However, the absolute biggest figure of 2004 for Jazz would not even be named Jazz. That would be Alternator's Meister. Jazz, weirdly enough, was actually the first figure ever designed for Alternators, and he was going to turn into a Porsche like his original G1 Jazz. But they were never able to get the license from Porsche. So Jazz would now turn into a Mazda RX-8. A good-looking figure, though the head is just a touch too small for my taste, and at the end of the day, I think it could have used a little bit more blue. Supposedly, the reason why this Jazz is missing so many key details is because they were hoping eventually Porsche would give them the ability to make that original Jazz. So that's also why this figure was called Meister in America. That said, the color schemes that weren't trying to be Jazz were actually some of the more interesting ones. You could have gone the Velocity Red Mika edition in Binaltech, that was the Japanese alternative to Alternators. It doesn't really look like Jazz anymore, but the red is really striking. But the best one, is the Meioki Iwaza edition. This was also released in 2004, and it's a one-of-a-kind figure, but look at how beautiful this car mode is. In 2006, Alternator's Meister would get a remake of sorts in the Titanium line. They did a 3-inch non-transformable die-cast metal figurine. 2007 was going to be a massive year for Jazz. But let's go over some of the smaller things first. He would have shown up in Robot Heroes in a 2-pack alongside Thundercracker, a very cute little Jazz here. But let's be honest with ourselves. The big thing in 2007 was the original Michael Bay Transformers movie. Jazz was one of the 5 Autobots chosen in the movie to bring Transformers to a whole new level of prominence that it had never been to before. You'd think that would mean Jazz would have a lot of toys, but I would guarantee you he had more than you would think. Starting off small, you'd have the Legends class Jazz, a very good-looking Legends toy, probably one of the best from the first movie, with a decent transformation and a good little car mode. The funny thing about him is that he's the biggest Legends toy from the movie. He's even taller than Optimus and Megatron, if you can believe that. This Jazz would be re-released the same year in a Costco exclusive multi-pack alongside Leader Optimus and Legends Bumblebee, before also being in the battle for the Allspark multi-pack of Legends movie figures. Undoubtedly though, the big figure Jazz got from the movie was the Deluxe Jazz. Look at this beautiful, beautiful car mode. It had a solid enough transformation, and the robot mode had some issues, but I really do enjoy the car mode here. Jazz's robot mode has good proportions. He's a bit stockier than he is in the movie, but at the same time, he's one of the more accurate toys to his character design from the film. My only issue here is his arms are very weedy. The transformation basically involves using the doors to make the arms, and that makes the elbows incredibly impaired and does kind of mess with the silhouette. Even still, I knew a lot of people who grew up with this being their favorite Transformer toy, and to be honest, had I picked up Jazz instead of Bumblebee as my first proper Transformer toy, he probably would have been my favorite too. This Jazz would be re-released as a Sam's Club exclusive alongside Bone Crusher and Brawl. If you lived in the United Kingdom, you'd be able to get a deluxe 3-pack that included this Jazz, Protoform Optimus Prime, and Brawl. Of course you gotta do G1 colors, and I have to say, G1 colors on this Jazz actually really works. It helps that you're basically using the same car mode, but even without it, it is a solid looking Transformer with a good weapon, and I think that the white color scheme helps mask the weirdness of his arms and elbows. Hey, do you remember when they brutally murdered Jazz in the movie? What if I told you that they did an extensive retool within the same year to do yet another Jazz with a messed up head and messed up legs so that you too could pretend to murder your favorite character? If you got the Transformers chess set, you would have had a couple of gold-colored Jazzes to serve as the bishops on the Autobot side of the board. Titanium were able to get their hands on Jazz once again to do a 3-inch version of movie Jazz. Pretty cool, pretty cool. For my money, one of the best Jazzes of 2007 would have been the Robot Replicas Jazz. Not only do they use Revoltech style joints, but it was some of the most screen-accurate Transformer toys of that time. It literally took until Movie Masterpiece to get to a point to find even more accurate versions of a lot of these characters. There was the Transformer Movie Dangler released in Japan. I don't know what this is. We got some more Robot Heroes love for Movie Jazz. Jazz would have been packed alongside Frenzy if you want his actual Earth design, or you could have gone the Protoform Jazz alongside Brawl. To wrap 2007 up, there was the Allspark Enhanced Autobot Jazz. Trust me, there was no slowing down as we went into 2008. Keeping with the movies, you would have had the Final Battle Robot Battle 5-pack. It would have included yet another Jazz who would have been battle damaged. A similar battle damaged Jazz with a different deco would have been in a separate 2-pack with just Megatron. You could have gone the Transformers movie Screen Cleaner Jazz. What even is this? This is kind of cool. You could have gone the Unleashed Ratchet and Jazz. This is basically a little sculpture of these two walking out of fire and flames. You would have had the Cyber Slammer Jazz. You pull back the car mode and then his robot mode pops off the roof. I actually really dig the Fast Action Battlers Ion Blast Jazz. I mean, it's basically just the deluxe, but his arms actually look a little bit better here. And it's a simplified kid Transformer, don't get me wrong, but give it credit. It's doing a pretty good job at getting movie Jazz. Yeah, all those Deluxes and Voyagers you just bought these characters, well, fork up more money and get the Premium Series. Better paint jobs, some re-sculpting to make them more film accurate. You remember how my issue with Jazz before is that he was too dull a gray color? Well, boom. Now he's a beautiful, beautiful silver. Pay up money, nerd. You could have gotten Deluxe Final Battle Jazz again in a 2-pack with Megatron, who straight up looks like he's on fire. I don't actually know what they were going for with this deco. He looks like Chester Cheetah on a Cheetos bag. Plus, over in Hong Kong, you could have gotten premium Jazz alongside Bumblebee, Optimus Prime, Ironhide, and for some reason a regular Ratchet inside the Commemorative box set. In terms of a more G1 Jazz, you could have gotten the Encore Jazz over in Japan. This was yet another reuse of the 1984 Jazz toy. Or, in the Universe 2008 line, you could have gotten Legends Jazz, a really nice little version of Jazz with a simple transformation that still manages to capture the character perfectly. There would have been yet another mini busted Jazz, this time put out by Diamond Select. Pretty solid looking bust here. You could have gone a very small, non-transforming Jazz in a promotion put out by Boss Coffee. Essentially, get some of the Rainbow Mountain Blend, take a sip, you might find a Jazz. Of course, there was more to 2008 than G1 nostalgia and the dregs of the first movie. You could have also checked out Animated, an amazing cartoon with a wonderful toy line that gave us what honestly might be the best Jazz toy of all time. I love how they managed to perfectly capture his proportions here. It flows so well, from your massive shoulders down to the very thin waist down to the big bulky boots. The transformation's intuitive and quick. The car mode might not be my personal cup of tea for Jazz, I think it looks just a bit too sporty, but it's undeniably a nice car. The best thing about this Jazz though is probably the head sculpt. You could have also picked up the Bumper Battler Jazz, very similar to another gimmick toy from the movie, but this one here I think looks a lot better mostly because it's a lot more colorful. To wrap up 2008, a monster year of figures for Jazz, you could have gone to Botcon and gotten the Shattered Glass Jazz. Now this is a really nice retool of Cybertron Crosswise, and it also would have been the first modern attempt to make a deluxe-sized G1 Jazz. I still think this looks like an amazing figure. We've had better Jazzes since then, but this would have been great on an Autobot shelf back in the day. Man, we've already covered so many Jazzes and we're only past 2008. Why don't we take just a break and look at some third-party Jazzes? Here's the weird thing about Jazz, right? He is one of the most beloved and well-remembered G1 characters of all time. And usually, if you're a G1 character with any type of cred, you get a Masterpiece figure. But Hasbro more than likely will never be able to make a Masterpiece Jazz, because Porsche is a bunch of schmucks. So, that leaves only third party able to do Masterpiece style Jazz figures, which may explain why we've had just so many of them. One of the first Masterpiece alikes I would have been made aware of was the Toy World Coolsville. Now this was going more for the toy than the G1 cartoon, which I'm fine with, I like the toy's design. But this figure is rough. The robot mode is beautiful, do not get me wrong, great articulation all the way around. The car mode looks alright, decent. But the transformation? Absolutely not with the transformation, I'm not going through that again. Hate it, and it feels like you're going to break the toy, and a lot of my friends have broken the toy. Make Toys had Downbeat. Now this is much more cartoon than toy, but at the same time, Make Toys have some amazing figures under their belt, and this Jazz is definitely one of them. A wonderful filling figure with comparable articulation to Coolsville, even though I'd argue it's a little bit less articulated. Where it really makes up for that though is quality of materials, how good it feels in hand, and the fact that the transformation actually feels like it's logical. Make Toys know how to make a nice feeling Masterpiece transformation, and Jazz is a shining example of that. Of course, nowadays, when people think Masterpiece Jazz, they would probably go with the Fans Toys Jive. And Fans Toys, it's a very simple formula. They are the most cartoon accurate, they're going to be the most impressive, they're going to use the most paint, and for a lot of Masterpiece collectors, they seem to be the final word in terms of the figures. That said, they're not my style. The transformations are always really rough, and alongside that, the paint damages way too easily. It's a good looking Jazz, don't get me wrong, the most cartoon accurate Jazz we will probably ever receive. At the same time, not my cup of tea. The newest Masterpiece alike to hit the scene is Agent Meister, and whereas all the others at least tried to lean a little bit into the cartoon, this guy is really going more for the toy, right down to how the white is a little bit more off-white and there's more mechanical metallic designs. I think the proportions here are really rough, especially with how massive and somewhat wonky the chest is, but it's a good looking figure all things considered. If you're more of a Legends collector, there is the New Age Monero, which is a wonderful little figure that is just a touch difficult to transform due to how small it is. But hey, everything New Age makes is always going to look really good and feel very nice, and Jazz here, no exception. Magic Square made a figure known as Blues. I love that name, that's so cute. I actually think Magic Square captured Jazz's design better than even New Age did. I really would like to pick this one up, especially one day, just because it looks really nice, and from what I hear, it has a pretty clever transformation. If you want more of an IDW style Jazz, you can always head over to Iron Factory and pick up Rush Beats. I love how this figure looks, it's such a unique Jazz. That said, the transformation here is really finicky. You almost have to have a toothpick or a screwdriver handy to wedge some of these pieces out. That said, for my money, the best third-party Jazz is Generation Toy Jazz. It's not trying to be Masterpiece. It's just trying to be a slightly nicer version of Generations. It's a Voyager-sized Jazz with a unique deco that invokes both the cartoon and the toy. It is very similar to the Reveal the Shield Jazz while still doing its own thing, and it would look beautiful with your Mastermind Creations IDW shelf. Man, I always like the third-party roundups. It's always cool to see what other companies try to do with these characters. But now, why don't we get back to Hasbro proper in the year 2009. Talking G1 first, you could have gotten the Mighty Mugs Jazz, just a pretty simplified version of Jazz. Mighty Mugs were basically Funko Pops before Funko Pops. In the animated toy line, you could have gotten Freeway Jazz. This was the original Jazz repainted to look more like the movie character. The Bumper Battler got a similar repaint, just being repainted to be more silver to look more like the movie, brand synergy. Jazz's only appearance in the world of the movies would have been in RPM, in which he was two-packed with Brawl. In 2010, there was the Human Alliance Jazz. Now, the Human Alliance figures were a mixed bag, to say the least. The big issue with him really are his proportions. Incredibly weedy arms and legs, as well as a head that just is a bit too complicated. Don't get me wrong, it looks good. You have a lot of great integration with Captain Linux and his motorcycle, a good-looking car mode, a simple enough transformation for what it is. It's just, it could use a little bit more bulking up, This Jazz could use anchor arms. 2010 would also show the release of the Special Ops Jazz in the Reveal the Shield toy line. A beautiful Generations Jazz that makes great use of not just a wonderful transformation, but a great car mode and one of the most articulated robot modes to ever come out of Transformers at the time. I especially love his C-clip gimmicks that allow you to use his boom boxes that he would use in the G1 cartoon from time to time. Going into 2011, Japan released their version of Special Ops Jazz in their United toy line. Far more cartoon accurate, but in all honesty, I think they've lost a lot of the detail by going for such a stark white car mode. 2008 Legends Jazz also finally made it overseas, once again with a brand new paint scheme to better invoke the G1 cartoon. Creo was able to put out a set for Jazz, and here's the thing, right? His Creon I actually really like. That's a good little Creon. What is this design? It is a very weird combination of G1 and movie, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of Creo sets did that, but Starscream and Bumblebee did it with some class. Jazz just looks like a geek. Of course, 2011 was the release year of Dark of the Moon, and even if he wasn't in the movie, Jazz still had a figure in the toy line. His original deluxe was repainted and turned into a Target exclusive. In 2012, you could have gotten the Creon Jazz set again alongside Bumblebee and Optimus Prime inside the Ultimate Vehicle Pack. If you were a fan of Fall of Cybertron and Jazz's amazing levels inside that game, you were probably excited to hear about how Generations was going to do a Fall of Cybertron Jazz. The only issue is, the Fall of Cybertron toys coincide with one of the worst budget cuts Hasbro ever put the Transformers design team through. These figures didn't really stand a chance. Even though a couple of them, like Soundwave and the Seeker mold, were able to make use of the budget in clever ways, Jazz really suffered. His limbs were prone to be incredibly limp when you actually pulled him out of the box, he had paint issues throughout the figure, his transformation wasn't all that clever. Alongside that, Takara Tomy did their best to get something out of this mold, giving it a way better paint job, but it still had issues with the actual joints themselves. But hey, you can't mess up a Botshot, can you? Look at Botshot Jazz. He's good, simple. Weirdly enough, his visor is white. However, the best Jazz of 2012 and my favorite Jazz toy ever was in the Generations Ultimate Gift Set. This deluxe Jazz was released alongside Combat Hero Optimus and a Legends Thundercracker and Motor Breath. It is the Reveal the Shield Jazz given the G2 paint scheme, and it's beautiful. I love the electric blue throughout. It's almost all spark blue. The orange helps give such life to this figure. A thing I complained about with the other releases of this Jazz is just the fact that the color scheme with the all-white car was just a bit too boring. But the orange really helps bring some new energy. I love how the spoiler says Jazz along the back. The gun and the other accessories are still here, still so clever. This was my childhood Jazz. I know that I have a huge amount of nostalgia wrapped into this figure, and it probably is painting my bias quite a bit. But that doesn't change the fact that this is still the Jazz I think of when I close my eyes. There wouldn't be much for Jazz in 2013. There was a translucent version of the Botcon figure, as well as a green one released in Japan in the Be Cool line. You also would have had 3 separate Loyal Subjects versions of Jazz put out, but they were all kind of just there. There would have been even less for Jazz in 2014. But if you went to San Diego Comic-Con, you could have gone the Knights of Unicron Reunion tour set and gotten smooth Jazz. 2015 would see an entirely new version of Jazz come to our TV screens in the Robots in Disguise cartoon. Here, he was just one of Bumblebee's old war buddies, and his toy is perfectly fine. Now, Robots in Disguise actually had a really hard time getting a lot of these designs into plastic form, especially with Hasbro constantly slashing their budget. I think this is actually one of the better figures from the early year of the line. It is very well proportioned, the articulation's pretty good all things considered, and even though the car mode is very boring with very little paint to show, it is overall a nice Jazz. If you're able to get the Takara Tomy version though, you'd been able to see this figure with beautiful, beautiful paint that really breathed a whole new life into this design. Now, let's say that you maybe weren't a big fan of this head sculpt. Weird thing to focus in on, but let's just say it. Later that year, you could get Jazz Battle Mode. That was a very minor retool of Jazz, now to give him a visor over his eyes. You were able to pick up a Tiny Titans Jazz in their Blind Pack series, a nice little version of the guy. Of course, for me personally, the big Jazz for the year had to be the Q Transformers Meister. Look at him! Why are they always so cute? Oh! The funny thing is, it's actually based more on Alternators Jazz than G1 Jazz. I mean, look at the car mode. But it's just so nice still. Why are Q Transformers always so good? Surely there's a dud. Surely there's a dud in Q Transformers. In 2016, oh god, it's another one. So this one doesn't transform, but it uses even brighter colors and it's even cuter. Oh, I need this Jazz. This Jazz I need. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. You could have also gotten the Transformers Figure Collection Jazz. This was like a modern redo of the Decoy figure. If you went and got a Bitfig blind box, you'd be able to get a very tiny Jazz alongside Starscream, Optimus, and Megatron. On the other end of the spectrum in 2016, you were able to go to get the Prime 1 Studio Museum Masterline Jazz. This is a massive statue of the original movie design. It looks beautiful, and it was limited to 350 pieces. Oh, he also had another Tiny Titans in 2016. In 2017, Jazz made his grand return to Generations with Autobot Jazz Power the Primes Edition. This figure is a mess. The torso is really, really rough. The proportions are decent, but not great. He looks a bit weedy. The car mode's okay. I don't like how the spoiler looks at all, honestly. And sure, he is a combiner limb, so there had to be sacrifices made, but due to him being a combiner limb, Jazz has lost some of his flair. 2018 would see a big turnaround for Jazz. He'd finally get some substantial figures again. You could get the movie The Best Jazz, which is the most screen accurate the original Jazz mold was ever allowed to become. Really nice looking, this one. Alongside that, you could have gotten the Studio Series Jazz. This figure is magnificent. One of my favorite Studio Series figures, a wonderful transformation, a robot mode that looks like it stepped right off the screen, minus the little backpack, and a great vehicle mode. A standout example of Studio Series and what they were able to do. If you're more of a G1 person, you could have gone the Keisha Surprise Jazz. Now, these were put out by Super 7. They're meant to, invoke the decoys. Blind packed little figures, but a solid looking Jazz. The most impressive thing for Jazz to come out in 2018 had to be the Imaginarium Art statue. This is 16 inches tall, features the grappling hook that we know from the pilot episodes, and it is a wonderful, wonderful looking statue. 2019 would give us our newest version of Jazz, that being the Cyberverse Jazz. Now, Cyberverse Jazz is really interesting because if they ever made it into the show, they were actually going to be a female character as opposed to the normal guy Jazz we're used to. So you could have gone the one-step changer Jazz, which is actually a really nice looking one-step changer. I'd love to pick this up eventually. Or you could have gone and gotten the tiny turbo changer Jazz. Somewhere around this time, Jada Toys would have done the Transformers Micro Machines figures. However, they did do a Jazz, and then we get the Masterpiece Movie Jazz. This is probably the only official Masterpiece Jazz is ever going to get from Hasbro, and it's a cool figure all things considered. The transformation's great for a movie masterpiece. Robot mode looks pretty solid, the vehicle mode is a bit panely, but at the very least is well painted. You even get a little Sam minifigure, yay! Here's the weird part. Part of the gimmick of this figure is that you can rip Jazz apart and his spinal column hangs out. I know we make the joke, but I don't need that on my toy shelf. Jazz is like a cool comfort character that a lot of people really like. Why does Hasbro want me to keep obsessing about his horrible death? I don't like this. I didn't ask for this. Who asked for this? Did you ask for this? I did not ask for this. Thankfully, Super 7 is here to remind us that toys can be fun with the Reaction Jazz figure. Look, it's simple, it's 5 inches tall, it was overpriced, but it's nice looking, and at least I don't have to think about Jazz's horrible dismemberment. There was also the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament. It's a very simplified version of the G1 toy. It doesn't move at all, but it looks really nice. We'd also see the release of the Studio Series 86 Jazz. This is meant to replicate his appearance in the 1986 G1 movie. There's a couple of oddities here. For instance, there's a 14 on his door as opposed to the 4. I don't get it, man. However, the robot mode actually is pretty solid. I do think the upper body's a bit too big, but at the end of the day, good transformation, good car mode. A lot of people really enjoy this Jazz. Not my personal favorite, not my cup of tea, but definitely a good figure overall. In 2021, Jazz joined the zeitgeist-defining toy line known as the Funko Pop line, being one of the many Transformers to be turned into a Pop. I actually quite like how this Jazz looks. Say what you will about Funko Pops, right? Sometimes they're a bit too simple for my taste, but for the most part, the Transformers all look pretty solid, Jazz being no exception. We'll pop over to the movie side of things for 2022 to talk about the Transformers 15th Anniversary Multi-Pack. This was a Studio Series 5-pack exclusive to Amazon. You could have gone Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Ironhide, Ratchet, and Jazz. These are 5 amazing figures, all given fresh new paint jobs to look even more screen accurate. This Jazz was already a standout, but now he's a bit shinier. There were a lot of oddities for Jazz this year, including a Nano Metafig, which looked fine, I guess. There was also the Mini-Mates Jazz. Things really blew up again in 2023 with Jazz getting multiple figures. The big one had to be Flame Toys Jazz. This is a part of their ultra high detailed action figures with LED lights, magnets, multiple accessories, hands, arms, eye options. It is an amazing Jazz, probably the single most high quality, high profile, high price point Jazz figure to ever be released. And if you're an ultra Jazz fan, this could be an easy centerpiece for a collection. I lied, it turns out there was a G1 Masterpiece Jazz, because there's a Jazz minifigure that came with Skyfire this year. But of course, if you were to pop into Target this year, you could also get the Buzzworthy Bumblebee Origin Autobot Jazz. This is the most cartoon-accurate Generations Jazz to ever exist, and he turns into Jazz's Cybertronian car mode that was seen very briefly in More Than Meets the Eye. What's cool about this is not only do you have this amazing looking robot mode that is ultra articulated, as well as a pretty cool shoebox of a car mode, but you get Jazz's grappling hook and gun. It is a wonderful figure, So, remember towards the beginning of the video when we were talking about the G2 Jazzes that got canceled? They were brought back from the dead this year. You see, there wasn't just one, but two Jazzes included in the Walmart exclusive Legacy Evolution Toxitron collection. There was the official G2 Universe Jazz, which was your, real Fanta looking Jazz here. It's just the Studio Series 86 Jazz given a new paint job, but boy is it pretty. But the big one has to be G2 Universe Laser Cycle Jazz. This is a pretty extensive remold of the Prime Universe RC, or a repaint of the G2 Universe Road Rocket, depending on how you want to look at it. This is one of the best looking Transformers of all time, to my eye, at least when it comes to deco. White, black, bright green, dark green, such a wonderful combination of colors, a very citrus type of color scheme, and the figure itself is really solid. A good motorcycle transformation, good articulation. I adore this little laser cycle. In 2024, we would get yet another return to the Studio Series 86 Jazz. If you had got the Autobot Stand United multipack, you could have gotten a Jazz that used fully opaque plastic, meaning no risk of damage from the clear plastic. Or, if you wanted a more high-end painted Jazz that still used the clear plastic, you could have gone the Dramatic Capture Series Jazz that came packed with Optimus Prime and Mainframe. I'm curious what the movie figures would be doing in 2024, and oh my god, that's just his corpse. Yeah, right now, this year, you can pre-order a Megatron statue from Prime 1 Studios, and they included literally just Jazz's horrible, desecrated corpse. What's even worse is he's not even named Jazz on the box, he's named Sideswipe. Earlier this year, I had a really fun time putting together the Blockies Jazz, a very solid looking model kit, very simple, costs about $7, and it is just absolutely dripping with personality. The 3-0 MDLX Jazz. They've just released photos of this guy, and I have to say, I can't wait. I already love the 3-0 line so much. They're some of my favorite Transformers on the market right now. And this Jazz, he's beautiful looking. We're going to get multiple head and hand options. The doors look so expressive. The paint is on point. The articulation is going to be perfect. He's going to even come with the little grappling hook. I love the little grappling hook. Jazz is a character that was born to be in a line like this, and I think he's going to be a standout figure when he does come out. And that's it. I think when all's said and done, this was the single largest video we've done up until this point. But for good reason. Jazz is one of the most beloved Transformers characters and toys of all time. I think it says a lot that it took ages just to get out of the G1 toys when we were talking about his figure history. This guy was so popular with the fans right off the bat that Hasbro kept going back to the well over and over again. There's a world where Jazz is just as prominent as Bumblebee. He probably should be that relevant considering how popular he was back in G1. But something derailed him along the way. If I had to guess, it's probably him dying in the 2007 movie. Even look at the early nostalgia figures. Bumblebee was nowhere to be found, but Jazz was getting statues, Legends of Cybertron, Alternators figures. It feels like Jazz already had a great deal of reclaimed popularity, and then he was just murdered. But alright guys, I'm gonna ask you, who's your favorite Jazz? Is there a Jazz that you would like to track down? Keep in mind, we have a big list of viewer requests coming up, but if you have any other suggestions, please let me know, just comment down below. Our next video is going to be Breakdown, and after that, I don't really know. So, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see what we get up to next time.